All right, so how can we identify binomial factors um, in an expression containing three terms or trinomials? So before we get into the factoring, what happens when we expand two binomial factors? What happens when we expand? So remember we did this with the SMILE method, and the reason why is we want to know which distributions give which terms in the answer. So when we went through this, we knew the when we multiply. Oh, I'm sorry. So when we multiplied using the SMILE method, um, we did the first terms, and that gave us the first term in our answer, which is x squared. So this is the first two terms. And then we multiplied the last two terms, and the last two terms gave us the last term in our answer. So when we multiply the 3 and the 4, we get 12. Now the SMILE gave us the middle term. So when we multiply the inside and the outside, what I like to call the SMILE, we needed to add these together to get the middle term. So the middle term in this case would be a plus 7x. So again, we always need to add or put those two middle terms together. Now, the same thing, just practicing. When we multiply using the SMILE method, we multiply the first two terms. And when we do that, we get the first term in our answer. The last two terms we multiply next, and that gives us the last two terms in our answer. In this case, it's the last term in our answer, which is in this case negative 20. So the middle term comes from negative 2x, positive 10x. When we combine those terms, we get the middle term, which is 8x. So again, if you notice what we're getting, every answer that we get is a trinomial. Right? The trinomial has no greatest common factors of the three terms, and the binomial factors that it came from are what we started with. So we're going to use this, now that we know, we're going to use this to be able to factor trinomials. So any trinomial with no greatest common factors in all the terms, we want to try, and this is the key, we want to try and look for two binomial factors. So we're basically kind of guessing which factoring is. If I know how to multiply really well, I should be able to factor efficiently. So let's look at this first problem. And we want to factor x squared plus 5x plus 6. So first of all, we see that this is a trinomial. It's three terms. And there's no greatest common factor in the terms. So what we're going to do is try to look for two binomial factors. So the first thing we're going to do is figure out that, all right, if it does factor, it's going to factor to two binomial factors. All right, so what are the binomial factors? Well, the first place we can look is the first term. So we know the first term comes from, so the first term has to come from multiplying the first two terms in the binomial factors. So in order for me to get x squared, the first two terms have to be x and x in my binomial factors. So the first terms give a product, right, that give x squared. And the only way I can do that is to get x times x. So the next place I'm going to look is the last term. I know the last term has to come from multiplying the last two terms of my binomial. So the last two terms in the binomial, or the last terms, are, or they have to be, factors of 6. So when I multiply the two numbers, I have to get 6. So there's choices. I mean, different integer factors. I could have 1 times 6 or 2 times 3. So which one is it? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put these factors in here. So if this was a 2 and a 3, this would have to be plus 2, and this would be plus 3. And the last thing I'm going to do then is always check the middle term. And that comes from the smile. So I know if I did this multiplication, the middle term would come from 2x and 3x. And if I add those two together, I do get the middle term of plus 5x. So the last thing I'm going to do is always check that smile. So again, we're constructing binomial factors, knowing how distributions give us the terms in an answer. So the factors would be x plus 2 times x plus 3. So let's try this a little quicker on the next two. So again, if we're trying to factor a trinomial, so this is a trinomial, and there's no greatest common factor. So we're going to try to look for two binomial factors. So the first place we look is our first terms. I know they have to produce x squared. So the first thing we do is basically set the first terms. I know the binomials have to start with x and x in order to get that x squared when I multiply. So the first terms are pretty much set. So now we're going to try the last term. I know I'm going to try factors of negative 12 So as I try factors of negative 12, I'm going to be checking until the middle term is satisfied. So let's try factors of negative 12. How about 2 and negative 6? And if I plug a 2 in and a negative 6, well, my middle term would be 2x and negative 6x, and that's negative 4. So the 2 and the negative 6 won't work, so I'm just going to erase those. Again, this is a lot of trial and error, but I know it has to fit this way. So let's try 4 and negative 3. So if I plug a negative or a positive 4 and a negative 3, and if I check my middle term, this would be a positive 4x and a negative 3x. Well, if I add those together, I get positive 1, and I want negative 1x for my middle term. So the only difference is the negative sign. So if I change this one to a negative 4 and this one to a positive 4, or positive 3, excuse me, then I would end up with a negative 4x here and a positive 3x here. And if I combine those, I get negative x. So again, I'm trying factors of negative 12 until the middle term fits or is satisfied. So now I have my factors. Therefore, it's x minus 4 times x plus 3. And so for the last problem, again, we're going to practice this. It takes a lot of practice with factoring. But the next problem, we notice it's trinomial, but there is a greatest common factor. We do have a greatest common factor. So we are going to factor that out first. And it looks like we have a common factor of x and 2. So if we take that greatest common factor of 2x out of our three terms, I'd be left with 3x squared plus x minus 4. So now we're going to try, for the trinomial that's left, we're going to try to factor into two binomials. So again, if we factor into two binomials, notice the first term coming from, they have to produce 3x squared, so it's got to be 3x and x. That's the only way I can multiply the first terms to get 3x squared. So now we're going to try factors of -4. Checking the middle term, right? Always checking the middle term, the smile. So factors of -4. We can't forget about the easy factors like 4 and -1, or -4 and +1. But if we plug in 4 and -1, maybe we look like +4 here and -1. We just have to check the middle term. The middle term would give me a 4x and a -3x. And if I combine those together, I do get 1x. So this is the binomial factors. Our answer then, we just can't forget, we had that already, we had the factor of 2x. So if we're going to factor that 6x cubed plus 2x squared minus 8x, we're going to get 2x times 3x plus 4 times x minus 1. So this would be my factorization.